I'd like to talk a little bit more about Russia, the situation in Russia. How many papers are there that you can trust? Are there any, the independent media? How's it?
In Russia?
Yeah. How's the situation?
Well, there's a couple of newspapers which are independent-ish. They still, even they have to operate within some guidelines, and they can come under attack, and they can get killed as well. Their journalists get killed. But even they are allowed to exist in a very, very small space, very low circulation, and it's because the Kremlin has some sort of need for them. So it'll use them to destroy opponents.
Like an alibi?
Well, an alibi, they don't care about that. That used to be an alibi for the West. Say, look, we have one independent newspaper. Like, no, it's not just that. They use it to destroy each other. So one newspaper is closer to the FSB. They'll use that to attack another establishment. So they need a little bit of freedom in the press in order to kind of like use it to attack each other. But look, it's a different dictatorship or authoritarian regime to the Soviet one, which tried to control everything top down and try to have one narrative. It's very different. They try to balance out the different narratives and control them from inside. So you have a left-wing narrative, a left-wing party, slightly left-wing news media, but they're all controlled by the Kremlin. So it's a very different model to the Soviet model. There is a little bit of freedom, but that freedom is actually also controlled. The people who are genuinely independent end up dead or arrested very fast.
Yeah. You have said that the Russian propaganda, that it's not about persuading anyone into something. It's about confusing people. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
There's a little bit of persuasion in the Russian language. So certainly reaching out to Russians abroad and spreading the idea of a Russian empire, that's about classic propaganda, an idea, story, imagery, war. But especially as regards to the West and internationally, if in Soviet times they would try to sell the idea of communist narrative, Soviet grandeur, there's much, much less of that now. Maybe there's a little bit with the far right, but that's a very specific kind of area. But generally they look at information in weaponized terms, how they can use it to defeat the will of the other side, confuse them, delay them, break apart alliances. So they'll use any narrative they need, or any ideology they need, or any disinformation they need, or any kind of fear-mongering they need in order to achieve these objectives. So it's not about ideas, it's about the function, the instrumentalization of information.
So is it working?
Yeah.
Is the Russian people uninformed or confused? Or?
The Russian people themselves?
Yeah. So
it's very interesting. Their model is largely the opposite of the Soviet one inside of Russia, in the sense that in the old Soviet one, people were meant to kind of believe in communism or pretended they did. Now Putin's ideology or propaganda is focused around making people feel that no change can ever happen, making them cynical. So they use conspiracy theories a lot, not to even have one enemy, but to give people the sense they live in a world of conspiracies where they can't control anything, where you can't change anything, and where, yeah, Putin's bad, but the West is just as corrupt, yeah? That everywhere is rotten. And that inside of Russia, there is no alternative to Putin. If there were to be an alternative, he'd be even worse, yeah? So a lot of the time, the opposition that's allowed are crazy right-wingers. So people feel, well, you know, if that's the alternative, I don't want that. So it's the point isn't to motivate people, it's to demotivate them. And that works very well, because you're using people's skepticism. You're using very good things, their critical thinking, their cynicism, which is not necessarily a bad thing, to stay in power.